It's Joe Parneville, and you are listening to the Forbes Books podcast. And the world of recruitment and talent management was turned upside down during the pandemic. And now that more and more companies are trying to bridge the gap between the ways of doing things prior to 2020 to the way things are done now, it's time to rethink finding, hiring, and retaining talent. And my guest this week has a few ideas. His name is John Mitchell. He's the president and CEO of the Global Electronics Industries Trade Organization, IPC, and the author of the book, Fire Your Hiring Habits, which drops in spring of 23. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome, John. And so I wanted to start the conversation by talking about the current state of talent recruitment. So much has changed since March of 2020, and for the first time ever, candidates have taken a bit of control. Much was said and written about the war on talent. I mean, since the caveman days, the boss always had the power, but recently it appears that dynamic has shifted a bit. Am I right about that?
Well, you're not wrong a year ago.
Okay.
But things are shifting again. About a year ago, it seemed like anybody who wanted to was ready to leave their job and basically set their own terms. They could say, hey, I'm looking for a starting bonus. I want to have this title, et cetera. I know I've only been out of school for 2 years, but I want to be a director. And you should give me that. And that seemed to work. But now lately, things are tempering a little bit. There's this whole concern about the recession. And while there are a few companies that are not, that have basically said, we're letting people go. Most of the companies have just said, we're slowing our hiring. You know, Google had originally at one point announced that they were going to be hiring 10,000 people. And it was big news. Oh, they're only going to hire 7,000. They're still hiring 7,000 people. So there's still a need. It's backing off a little bit. So I haven't heard in the last, I want to say 3-4 months, anybody really saying, oh, well, look at me. I got this signing bonus. You know, I'm super awesome. And I'm not hearing that as much anymore. Whereas the signing bonus, you didn't hear about them for probably 5 years. And then suddenly came back with a vengeance.
Huh. And it's funny, I spoke to one recruiter once, not too long ago, and they said that job seekers are now job shoppers because of the number of opportunities where they're basically picking a job like they would go to Amazon and picking out a pair of shoes. And for someone who's been doing this for so long, is it weird that dynamic exists to a certain extent?
Most definitely. I just get surprised by things ebb and flow. When I first started looking for a job, there was a downturn in the automotive industry. And yet I still got a job in the automotive industry. It wasn't like it was, a crazy lucrative job. Oh, welcome to you, young buck who's only had 5 years of experience. Let's give you a vice president position. No, it wasn't anything silly like that. Still, I find that even when there's hard times, and there will be some hard times. I mean, right now, economists are predicting next year in the U.S. that there'll be over 1 million jobs that will be lost.
Wow.
So employment right now, I think, is something like at 3.9%, and it's going to increase. But there'll be about 1 million or so people that will not have jobs that have jobs today. So that'll be a little bit different of a dynamic in a recession than we're at right now. And so I think everybody's just kind of, nobody wants to fire people. So if you can slow your hiring and not have to fire people, then more's the better.
Yeah, it is funny how people are, I guess they're not, but they're almost like trying to fast forward to the recession, because we've been talking about the R word for so long that it really, people think it's here. It's not. And it's because of those job numbers, because a recession technically can't happen until those unemployment numbers skyrocket, correct? That's a big part of what a recession is.
Employment definitely impacts your overall ability to recover from a recession, or how deep a recession will be. But I guess the technical definition is just negative GDP for 2 quarters.
Right.
Employment is a factor into GDP. It's not the only factor. So you could do it without, you could have gaining employment, and technically there are ways to actually still enter a recession.
But in this day and age, though, it seems like I'm old enough to remember all the recessions that I've been through. It usually goes hand in hand with a real skyrocketing of unemployment.
It's a vicious cycle, right? As things start getting tough economically, people are saying, well, businesses will go, I really probably shouldn't hire people because things are tough economically, and people are sticky, and they cost money. And so if you're not hiring people, then things get tougher, because there's more people without jobs, and more people without jobs are going to pull more on government. And if there's more of a pull on government, then, hey, we need to cover other things as well. So yeah, there's a whole cycle that has to be broken as we go forward. Right now, most traditional economists are saying that it will be a fairly shallow recession next year, but there's a lot of wild cards out there. I was talking with one of the industry leaders as he was saying, all these economists, they all seem to agree, but, they all agree about a lot of things, and they're often wrong about a lot of things. What I really think they ought to be looking at is the 1930s.
Oh, geez.
As a sample for the recession, as opposed to the 2000s, because, we've got some global conflicts going on. You've got trade issues that are flowing. So all of that just really makes it tough to predict. And even the economists will say they have a really, really challenging time predicting recessions.
Yeah.
They're very good at pointing at them in the past.
Right. They're like almost economists / historians. And it's funny because Michael Burry, the guy who Christian Bale played in The Big Short, who predicted the 08 recession, he's come out, and again, I don't normally get scared by these economists because, like you said, they all kind of like, they're great at Monday morning quarterbacking, but never beforehand. But this guy's come out and said, "Oh, yeah, no, this one's going to be really bad." So when a guy like that says, I'm like, "Oh boy, this guy
it makes you sit up and take notice, doesn't it?" And you go,
absolutely does. All right, so the what you're working on too is you're writing a book about fire your hiring habits. What do you think is going wrong with companies hiring people right now? What are some of the big issues that they're doing?
Mostly what I feel like where many companies are missing the boat is they haven't caught on to the view that the world has changed, okay? We have had for some time now a shift in demographics. So right now, I believe they said by 2030, 60% of all management positions will be filled by millennials, okay? And already today, you're over 50. So you have to, there was this big outcry. Oh, these millennials, they move around, and some whining about that a little bit. But they are the workforce. They are the management team. And if your company culture has not adapted to the needs of the workforce, you will find yourself in trouble finding and keeping the right people. And that has just accelerated with things like the pandemic. So before, there were a few companies that said, "Oh yeah, we do this hybrid. You can work from home, et cetera." And it was kind of like this luxury fringe group, that said, "Oh, I work from home. Look at me." And they're like, "Oh wow, what a kook. That guy is able to work from home. How crazy is that?" Now, and then for 2 years, everybody did it, and now everybody expects it. And so, I have a friend of mine who he worked at a very large company, very public name. I'm not going to mention them, but they basically said this past December, "Look, if you manage people, you need to come and everybody needs to be back in the office, period." End of story. And they were an IT group that was being demanded of this. Now, his particular group was an IT group. There's no reason that they can't work from anywhere in the world. In fact, they had been for the last couple of years, and their productivity didn't drop. They're struggling to hire. And guess what? Half that team left. They found better jobs for people that got it. And so I think the biggest challenge in today or one of the larger challenges that, and we emphasize it in the book as well, is that you need to get into today's world and you need to adapt your culture to support things like a hybrid workspace or a changing demographic and changing needs from diversity and inclusion. All of these things have really shifted the landscape, and just too many companies culturally have moved too slow, or in essence, haven't moved at all from the 80s.
Yeah. And it's funny you said the 80s. So as a card-carrying Generation Xer, you talk about the mobility of millennials and now Gen Z. As a Gen Xer, you were like, okay, cool. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to go get a job, work my way up, and then stay at that place for 20 years and then retire. Millennials and Gen Zs do not see it that way. They're like, hey, I'm going to work in this job until I'm no longer happy and I'm going to move on. Our boomers and the older Gen Xers, they really have a lot of difficulty grasping that concept, don't they?
Well, historically they do, and as we were doing some of the research for this book, we went out and just decided to look at some of, specifically we pulled up the employment data here in the United States and wondered how often do people actually change jobs? And so we expected to see that the time at jobs would shrink, over as we got closer and closer to today. It has changed so minimally, you'd be shocked. Basically, if I go back to 1980, the average time in the job, I believe, was at that point 4.5 years. Today, it's like 4.1.
Interesting.
So it has not changed significantly if you look at it from that scale over the last 40 years. However, there is a sense that they're willing to go.
Mm.
And I saw a great quote that basically said, you should be happy that Gen Zers or millennials or whomever want to move. They only move until they find a place they want to be. Once they're there, they're happy to be there.
Mm.
So they're looking for the right fit. And that's part of the message of this book is you need to create a place where people can fit. If you don't have a place to fit, they're willing to leave. And so it's the willingness to leave that I think is there. But once they find a place, they're willing to be there. If you have a mentality of saying, oh, they're going to be here for 20 years, that's caveman. If you get 3 to 5 years out of an employee and they're productive, that's a win. And you should celebrate it and bring, as they go on to somewhere else, that's wonderful. Bring in someone new and say, okay, that person had attributes W, X, and Y. And I'd like to, in addition to that, add, P, Q, and R.
Do you think it's more about, you said the word mentality, that hiring people and leaders are worried that the younger generations have this mindset that they'll come and go as they please, whereas the people that are doing the hiring, they don't think that way. Like to them, they're like, oh, okay, you want to be part of this company and you want to be, work here for many, many years, where it's not even like you said, data shows that it hasn't changed that much, but it's really just the mentality of these hiring managers and leaders that think, oh, people who want to come to this company will want to be here for the rest of their life.
Yeah, and you want to rely on someone. You don't go off saying, hey, we've got a 3-month opportunity here, and I don't care what they do after that, because for those people, you hire contractors. The other aspect that I think may play into it is people tend to have families later now. So if you have a family, say you're a young couple and your husband's working here and you're working there and you've got 2 kids and you're trying to figure that out, both of you quitting and changing jobs all the time is, if you've got a mortgage and things like that, suddenly there's a lot of pressure to stay wherever you are. But I believe that those type of, nucleus families, if you will, the old traditional families, are less and less now. And so people are more flexible. I was advising a group of MBA students at Pepperdine, and they had this roundtable. I sat on their board. Students were coming to me and they said, so what piece of advice would you give us? And I was like, how many of you are married and have kids? And none of them raised their hands. I said, okay, do what you want. This is your opportunity. Explore, try something new. Because if you do that and you fail, what's the worst that can happen? You go sleep on your buddy's couch for a couple of months while you try to figure out where you're going to land. It's not like the end of the world. So now is the time to explore and try all that great stuff. And when you find the thing you love, your passion or your area that you want to go do, then stick with that.
And a big part of what you're doing too with the book is building this environment that will have people want to stick around or, attract talent. And for many, many years, people were sort of emulating the .com boom where it was like, hey, we've got a foosball table. Hey, we've got free snacks. And that's not culture. I think for a lot of people that they thought that was culture, but it's not.
No, those we term those are perks, that's frosting. Culture is the cake. It is the environment in which you work and thrive and feel comfortable. One of the areas that we really emphasize a lot is, you want to get as much benefit from your team as you can. If someone comes to your workplace and does not feel comfortable for whatever reason, if there's some sort of discrimination, and that can take many, many forms because you're too old or too young, because you don't have as much experience, or because you came out of a different industry, or because you have a certain gender, or because, and the list goes on and on and on. If you don't feel comfortable, you're going to reserve part of yourself. Okay. And if you're not making your whole self available to the problem at hand that you're trying to solve in your workplace, you're not as engaged, and the company itself is not getting as much as they could. And so it's a less efficient system. So that's where the culture piece comes in. And that's where it really it's very important to think about these things as you're trying to determine what kind of organization are you. I mean, we have 5 generations in the workplace today. And it has to play, in many cases, to most, if not all of those demographics and generations. And that's tricky.
Yeah, and one of the things I always read about is like high performing workplace. They want high. Where what do you call it? Type A, the A A people,
A types,
A types. Yeah, everybody wants that, but there's like, the old book, 99 Ways to Skin a Cat. There's so many ways to get to that, right?
There are. And honestly, one of my favorite books is written by Sir Wicki. It's called The Wisdom of Crowds. And in that, he basically makes the case that you really don't want all of one type anyway, even if they're experts. What you want is a diverse group. It needs to include experts, but the more diverse opinions you get, and I've been a huge believer in this for my whole career. I don't know, somebody turned me on to that book really early on, and I read it, and it just sunk in, and just a fantastic exploration of the topic and uses real examples there. But when you have a diverse group, you just get better ideas. You get better solutions. And just because it looks like a diverse group doesn't mean it's a contributing diverse group. So I think it's critical. I mean, when I was hiring, when I was working at Bose, we interviewed literally thousands of people trying to build a brand new division there. And one of the recruiters came up to me and they said, "So what kind of people are you looking for?" I said, "Well, we've got a bunch of us, young whippersnappers that think we can change the world, overnight, and no obstacle is too large. Let's go solve that. But I'd also like to get somebody who either is close to retirement or has already retired, and get them on my team as well." And she's like, "That's easy. There's a lot of those people." They're like, why would you want that? And I'm like, because I want somebody with 30 plus years of experience to look at us and go, "You guys are nuts. Had you even thought about this?" Because there's so many things just due to lack of experience we haven't thought of.
Huh. It's funny you said that, because I feel, and I joke a lot with people about this, that ageism is the last allowable ism. The rest of them are, you can't do those, but ageism is still kind of acceptable. It's still okay to make fun of old people. It's still okay to not avoid hiring them. What do you say to the people that are like, for lack of a better word, ageist, that are like, "Oh no, I want to only hire someone who's fresh out of college, someone who's 30 years old, unencumbered. We could shape them into any way we want them to." What do you say to those folks?
They're falling into that same trap we were talking about earlier. They're thinking that the people they're going to hire are going to stay with them for maybe 10 or more years. That's a mistake. And if you go into it thinking, "Hey, if I get 3 years out of this, why not hire somebody who's 70? Because they've got tons of experience and they'll get it, and they're happy to be there." You're leveraging and gaining just so much from that opportunity. No, I'm not saying exclusively, but that's where the benefit is. So my answer to those people would be, mix it up. Get some of everything. Because even those people that you're saying, "Oh, we can mold them," by the time you're ready to mold them, they may have moved on.
That's true. That's absolutely true. All right, so let's talk about some of the pieces that you work with. So recruiting is obviously the first part of it. It's sort of like the first date, finding people, connecting with them. When it comes to recruiting, what are some of the steps that people are doing right?
So some of the things that people are doing right, they're starting to leverage tools. We've become a very social network cognizant world. So using tools like LinkedIn or Indeed, things like that to find people is a good solution. I mean, when I came here to IPC, I was looking for my executive team, and the typical way that most businesses will go look for executive teams is we'll go hire a recruiter, one of the big firms, and they'll help us find it. And they'll do all the hard work, blah, 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 blah. And usually that works pretty well. It takes some time. It takes a lot of money. I found my entire executive team through LinkedIn. Now, it doesn't mean I found that exact person, but I connected to somebody that looked like that person, and then said, "Hey, would you be interested?" As I talked with them, they weren't, or may have been. But I said, "But who do you know?" And then, so it was just like one skip away, forget about the 6 degrees of separation. It was 1 degree of separation. And suddenly we were interviewing really quality people. So utilizing those tools, but there are a lot of people that don't. I mean, a lot of people are like, "Oh, let's post the job. We'll get 1,000 resumes sent in. We'll use our cool AI tools to filter based on keywords." And guess what you just did? If somebody didn't think about those keywords, you lost an opportunity where you might have found the greatest person ever. So it's a challenge, but there are some good things happening as far as using those tools.
You mentioned data. Sometimes I feel it's paralysis by analysis. We have so much information, and that if you mentioned the keyword thing, if someone doesn't have the right keywords in their resume or CV, the algorithm
spits them out.
It's gone. And so is there any way to fix that? Because I feel like we're so into that world now. where it's almost like the point of no return, where it's like, okay, everyone who sends a resume has to go in through this machine, and if the machine does not like it, it will not even get to a hiring manager.
Yeah, and it really depends on the kind of position, right? Say I'm Amazon and I'm trying to fill a factory with 1,000 people. I might accept resumes, but honestly, why would I? I don't really care what their past experience is because I don't require a lot for that. Why don't I just have a quick job fair and bring the people in and say, here, over 3 hours, we're going to give you a quick tour. We're going to show you what we've got. We're going to interview you. If we like you, we're going to make you a job offer right there on the spot. And suddenly I had a lot of interaction there, whereas before I may not have. At an executive level, I think it's about networking and talking and continually talking. You're always looking for the best people, even though you might not hire that person for 5 years. You maintain connections with them and opportunities show up both at your organization as well as their lives change as you go through. So always maintaining that connection. We found one of our best people through a conference. He was presenting. And I had one of my VPs come back and he goes, John, I think you need to talk to this guy. And we approached him and said, hey, we'd love to get you engaged with our organization. And his answer was, I'm pretty happy where I'm at. Fast forward a year, he's working for us.
Wow. It's funny they talk about the talking piece. I mean, I'm such a big fan of it, and I even wrote a book about it. The fact that how the importance of having direct conversations with people, and it almost like all this technology and data has made us a bit lazy. So whereas texting has sort of killed the art of conversation, all these computing power and data and technology has killed that sort of drive to get out and meet people. We're like, oh no, we've spent X amount of dollars on this software program, so why should we get out there and network? So it's almost like we need to marry the two. We need to have the old school way of hiring with the future way of technology.
And there is value to that filtering. Don't mistake me. I mean, if I'm trying to hire 100 people and suddenly I get 15,000 resumes for those people, well, I don't have time to go through all that. So some filtering is inevitable. But when it gets down to a manageable group, if you want to create a team that's going to be effective and move mountains, then you need to get involved and craft that team yourself with the right personalities. I mean, one of the questions that I ask in every single one of my, and now I work for a small organization, instead of hiring tens of thousands of people, we're in the hundreds of people, right? And I've made it a point, even as the CEO of the organization, I interview every person that comes in the organization. Now, I don't do the first interview, but when we get down to the final bits there, I want to make sure, because I want to make sure they're the kind of person that is going to help us form the team. And the question I ask everybody is, share with me some aspect of your life. It can be a hobby. It can be, something that you do on the side. It could be from your past, whatever. Share with me something that you're passionate about. And the reason I ask that question is because I'm looking for people of passion. And I've had fantastic answers, and I've had horrible answers. Well, the worst answer that I used to hate getting when I would ask this question when I was at Bose was, I'm passionate about work. I'm like, what? Whereas the other, I remember this one guy, and now Bose is based in Massachusetts, and this guy says, I'm passionate about the Red Sox. And I said, well, and I had recently moved to the Boston area, and I said, well, pretty much when you sign a lease or a mortgage, you pretty much have to say, right there on the dotted line that you're going to be a Red Sox fan. He looked at me, slams his hand on the table. You don't understand. I was at 152 games last year. And he just went on, and I was like, holy smokes, this guy is passionate. Maybe certifiable, but he's definitely passionate.
Oh, I love that. How involved in that process where you're sort of almost rubber stamping? How involved are you in that step of that conversation with that candidate? Is it make or break, or have you stepped forward and be like, "Hey, listen"?
I have raised the flag and said, "Hey, wait a minute, let's talk about this before we make an offer," because what I'm trying to make sure this person is going to be a member of the team. The other thing that it gives me a chance of is it gives me a chance to directly communicate my vision for the organization, right, one-on-one, and let them ask questions about it. And so to me, that's worth 30 minutes of my life. But again, keep in mind, I'm not hiring 10,000 people.
Right. All right. So let's move to the next step, which is onboarding after the person's been hired. I'm not a fan of that word onboarding. It sounds very almost like medical. I don't know what. There's something about onboarding, but what are people? Let's
It's
go.
assimilating. We're making you part of the Borg.
That's it. All right. So I asked you what we're doing right. What are we doing wrong when it comes to onboarding?
So most of the people have a traditional onboarding methodology fall into something that looks like this. Hey, welcome to work. We're glad to have you. Here's your HR forms, and here's our policies. I hope you'll read the employment handbook. Let me know if you have any questions. This is where you're going to sit. And let me introduce you to Judy. Judy is our guru on whatever it is that we happen to do here, and she'll answer any questions you have. You'll shadow her for part of the day, and then after that, you'll get it. And basically, that's most of what I see out there in terms of onboarding. They take their most valuable asset and try to get them to teach everything about the company because they're the most valuable asset. We want to replicate that person. But what happens is they're also one of the most busy people. So they're not available. Just because they know how to run the organization doesn't mean they know how to teach or educate somebody. That's an entirely different skill. And as they go through that, most often what you find, and this happened to me at one of the companies, I didn't want to bother that person because it was emphasized how busy they were. And you could see it everywhere. Every single thing, people are just calling on them all the time. So I'm like, I'm not going to bug that person. I got to just go figure it out on my own. So that's the kind of the typical, and it's worked, right? Companies aren't closing every day, and most of them don't have a good, structured, repeatable, consistent onboarding process. But because it's worked, they don't feel like they need to change. They could be doing something much more efficient, utilizing, an industry group that covers 90% of what they do, and then just only use that expert for the truly unique things. Everybody thinks they're unique, right? And frankly, there's an awful lot of us that even if we think we're unique, if you were to break it down, you go, okay, actually, here's the 6 things about you that are unique.
That's funny.
Otherwise, you fit into a big mass. Where we all have skin. We all have blood.
Yeah,
there's a lot of similarities.
And so, how can we do onboarding right? Because the way you explain it sounds like every onboarding I've ever seen in my entire life, where basically that first 2 or 3 days you're not doing anything but like trying to find where the bathroom is. Like you said, no one's closing down or companies are shutting down because of onboarding. But is it worth trying to make that better, or is it just one of those things where it's like you're ripping off the Band-Aid, where it's like it's one of the things we got to do. It's either going to be slow or fast. So is there a way to do it better?
So companies always want to be more efficient. We use the analogy, you want to take your new utility player, you just drafted this person, right? And he comes on board and you want to get him playing as soon as possible. Get him to be a contributing member of the team because it's costing you money, and the sooner they can contribute, the better. Right. So it is worth it to solve this problem. Tying up your MVP where, in training the rookie is not allowing the MVP to hit at their weight. Right. So it's important to do this from an efficiency perspective. The best way that we found to do this. So at IPC, we've tried to do this for the electronics industry. There are specific jobs. And we said, okay, where are the gaps? I mean, even, say you're hiring a new engineer, electrical engineer. These are people that, bright people. They understand, calculus and differential equations, and they can do all of that. But invariably, when I talk to companies, they say, yeah, I hired these electrical engineers out of school and they don't know anything. Now, that's not really true. They do know things. They just don't know how to contribute.
Right.
And so what we did is we worked with hundreds of companies across the electronics industry, and we developed what is the things that you wish they knew. And so we put that into 35 to 40 hours, depending on how fast you go through it, of online content. So they can actually, at their own pace, maybe even in school, grab all of that so they can be contributing much quicker. If you've got an industry association that's willing to work with your industry to provide these kinds of workforce benefit tools, that's exactly what you ought to be looking for. You can also, if you're large enough, do it yourself. If I'm a multinational, multi-billion-dollar company, there's no reason why it wouldn't pay dividends as long as it's not constantly changing.
That reminds me so much when you talk about like using your MVP or your pro to train the amateur. It reminds me so much of, I don't know if you recall back in the spring, the Tennessee Titans, they had drafted a new quarterback and the incumbent quarterback was asked, his name's Ryan Tannehill. Now that they've drafted this young rookie, are you going to put him under your wing and show him the ropes? And what I loved about his answer was he was just so frank. He's like, no, I'm here to do my job. And if he learns from me, that's great. But my job is not to train the rookies or to show the rookies the way around. It's to do my job. And if the rookie picks up on it, cool, that's fine. That's awesome. That's the way I learned it. But I'm not going to do that.
So I would differ. My view of that is just slightly different. I think the MVP should not be showing him how to tie his shoes, put on his pants, pick up the ball, hold it in a certain way. But what he might be able to do is walk in and say, "Hey, here's something I picked up when I started playing for the NFL. And when I see this, here's a couple of cues." So it could be 5 minutes that could make a world of difference to this person, but it only needs to be that 5 minutes. He doesn't need to spend, the rest of the time saying, here's how your locker works at the clubhouse.
Yeah. It's almost like you don't have to be Obi-Wan to Luke Skywalker here. It's almost like you could just be a pal. In other words.
Exactly.
Yeah. And lastly, let's talk about what you're doing with the book and why you're doing it. I always like to ask folks like yourself who are incredibly successful, don't need to do this. Why is it important for you to share your story and write the book? Why do you do it?
First off, I'm a huge believer in education. I think that we continue to make ourselves better as long as we're constantly learning, developing, exploring. You can't learn enough, right? And so this is part of that. And this is learning for the masses. Too often, people sit there and think that, oh, I finished school, so I'm done. If that's the attitude that an individual has or that companies have, I think they're just ready for failure. And they're going to fail on the employee side because employees that are productive are constantly learning and growing. And so, we need a pipeline of those people coming into the organization. We need a good, solid way to onboard them quickly and effectively. We need to show them a pathway on how to go from wherever they're starting to wherever they want to go so they see the steps and we can guide them along those steps. Organizations that have pathways really then have more loyal employees. You talk about switching. If you have that clear pathway, there's no reason for them to switch if that's what they want, unless they suddenly decide, I want to become a barista. And then they move on to go do that. And there's a pathway to becoming that. But understanding that, and then there's constant upskilling. Throughout that path, as you're going from, new college grad to say you want to be the vice president of communications. As you're going along that path and you see the various milestones, there are going to be new technologies. Think about that. If you wanted to become a VP of communications, let's say back in 1995, and you viewed that as a 10-year path or maybe a 5-year path, whatever it was. And during that time, suddenly social media started coming around. If you didn't learn that, you were never going to continue on your path. So there are just new skills always popping up along the road that make you better at what you want to do. So the reason I wanted to write this book was to help companies find the best people, keep the best people, because that's what makes companies great, is the people.
And I know in the description of the book, it says, it's time to get rid of your same old recruiting methods. What do you say to folks who are like, man, I love my same old recruiting methods?
That's great. As long as you've had no problem finding the people you're looking for, if it's working for you, great. But too many people that I run into in companies are saying, I can't find the people I'm looking for. I can't find the right people with the right talents. I can't keep the people. People are changing too often, which starts the finding cycle all over again. And then there's the whole cost of replacement thing, which you need to factor in right from the beginning. So I say to those people, if you're hiring 2 or 3 people a year and you've had great luck using your methodologies, fine. But if you are struggling to find people, if you're struggling to keep your best people, you better pay attention.
His name is John Mitchell. His book, Fire Your Hiring Habits, is out next spring. John, it's a pleasure talking to you. Looking forward to what you're doing with this book, because remember, once the book's completed, that's when the hard work really begins. You know that, right, John?
That's right. All
right, John, best of luck.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome, and that's it for this episode of the Forbes Books podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.